1506, Lisbon, the capital of the Portuguese Empire, then known as the Lady of the Seas, had benefited for centuries from the industrious Jewish community to which the kingdom's prosperity was largely due. In 1496, King Manuel banned the practice of Judaism in Portugal and gave the Jewish community a deadline to leave the country, following similar events that occurred 4 years earlier in Spain. The king, however, knew that he needed the Jews and only wanted to convert them to Catholicism. The majority were therefore prevented from leaving the territory. They were baptized by force. They called them the New Christians. Many new Christians, in fact Jews, were kept in prominent social positions, including in customs and tax collection in general, which displeased the genuinely Catholic population.
As taxas nesta cidade estão a tornar-se insuportáveis. Homens de bem, ao trazerem as suas mercadorias, não podem ser expoliados desta forma.
As portas deste reino estão abertas para os que desejam comerciar em paz e respeito. Se não entender a razão das taxas, talvez deva procurar outros portos.
Catholics, by tradition, now called Old Christians, considered the Jews to be heretic and false converts who maintained Jewish practices unchanged within their homes. In April 1506, there were times of the Black Death. Jews were the least affected by the disease due to hygiene precautions and the religious obligation to wash their hands before eating bread. This gave way to conspiracy theories. The Jews were accused of being responsible for the spread of the terrible disease.
Gentes desta cidade, não vedes o que se passa diante de vossos olhos? A fome rasga os nossos estômagos. A seca mata as nossas colheitas. E a peste leva nossos irmãos. São eles, os judeus, que trouxeram esta desgraça!
The environment was ripe for an attack on the Jewish community. Furthermore, in order to protect themselves from the plague that was ravaging Lisbon, the king, his court, and the nobles were in the province. The capital of the empire was unguarded in terms of security, with practically no guards. The Jews, so hated, were in danger like never before. On April 19, at the convent of San Domingos, an assembly of believers prayed to God for an end to the plague, drought, and misery. During the Mass, a light appeared and fixed on a crucifix. What happened was interpreted by believers as a miracle and a supernatural revelation. This had a huge emotional impact.
Miraculo! Miraculo!
Families from all over the city, in religious ecstasy, rushed to the convent. Within minutes, the strange, luminous spot attracted a crowd. Everyone wanted to be witnesses of the divine manifestation. However, the unexpected happened. A young Jew tried to explain that the point of light was just the reflection of a candle.
Bom povo! Não veem que é a luz das velas a refletir no crucifixo?
The event generated the most lively protests.
É judeu. Ele quer negar o milagre.
The young man was immediately looked at with hatred. Insulted and accused of denying the miracle because he was Jewish. Angry, the believers threw themselves at him with the greatest ferocity. He was grabbed by the hair, dragged, punched, and kicked. Everyone ignored the victim's screams of pain and requests for mercy. In the square, the young Jew was mutilated and killed, while religious people fanned the flames further. Two Dominican friars stood out for their impiety and angry phrases.
Irmãos! Irmãos! Vede! Estes judeus são falsos batizados!
Nimble hands soon built a pyre of wood where they laid the mortal remains of the deceased Jew. A torch transformed that pyre into an immense brazier. The ignition of the persecution of the Jews had been activated. The angry crowd cried out for Jewish blood, whether men, women, old, sick, or children. The trigger was laid for a bloodthirsty hunt that would extend to the entire city and surrounding areas for 3 days. The small Jewish traders who worked in the vicinity of the convent were the first targets of the angry mob. It was impossible to resist the numerical weight. The rancor and the impetuosity of the oppressors, violated in every way and stripped of all their heritage, the Jews were then taken to the fire to be burned.
Expurgai a cidade destes talmudistas!
The municipal magistrate, invested with royal authority, arrived in a hurry to put an end to the ongoing bloody rebellion.
Ordeno que se reponha a ordem pública!
But unaccompanied by sufficient forces, he was pursued and almost lynched. Also on the Tejo River, ruthless people began to light pitas to sacrifice innocent people. In a morbid procession, wheelbarrows and other larger ones pulled by oxen transported the disemboweled bodies to the huge bonfires. The flames were as high as the houses, and the Dominican friars promised the angry populace absolution of all sins.
Em nome do Altíssimo e da Santa Igreja, eu vos absolvo de todos os vossos pecados.
In the port, the crews of foreign ships never stopped stirring up the population of Lisbon, so that crimes multiplied more and more. Hundreds of mutilated bodies waited their turn to be consumed by the flames. Violence surpassed anything that could be thought of. Even Jewish children were transported alive to the fate of horror. On that fateful day, about 2,000 Jews of all ages died in despair. Lisbon fell asleep, startled by the sleep of death. The next morning, small militias made up of poorly armed citizens, including kind-hearted priests, heroically attempted to restore peace to the city. However, the numerical disproportion in relation to the aggressors meant that their attempts were quickly crushed. There were so many victims that the criminals wanted to burn that there was a lack of firewood to fuel the city's pyres.
Aqui! Temos aqui mais madeira!
People walked the streets, armed with swords and vests. Others displayed severed heads stuck on spears. Assassins broke down the doors of homes, looking for more Jews to kill.
Deus há de dar-vos força para superar este mal que aflige.
In the city of Avis, many hours away by horse from Lisbon, the king was informed about the genocide of Jews that was taking place in Lisbon.
Majestade, as notícias de Lisboa que este homem traz requerem a vossa imediata atenção.
Fala, homem, que ocorre em Lisboa.
Majestade, Lisboa está a sofrer um terrível massacre.
Many of those who hid Jews in their homes, trying to save them, saw their doors broken down and their homes invaded by people thirsting for blood. The Jews were thrown out of the windows to the spears of death. The indiscriminate violence reached such a point that even some Catholic families with a long tradition were taken by Jews and were also taken to the purifying fire. The image of hell, a demonic party, a city without mercy. On the third day, Lisbon woke up to discussions among the criminals about where the Jews could have hidden. Once again, many were found and killed. Among them, Don Joan Mascarenhas stood out, who was the king's squire and holder of customs rights in Lisbon and Porto. In an act of courage, the squire faced the murderous mob in the eyes and right there predicted the worldwide decline of the nation once its Jewish community was destroyed.
Sem os judeus, o Império sucumbirá.
Then, the hammering of the hooves of a large number of horses was heard. A military force from the king entered the city, determined to crush the rebellion, restore order, and severely punish the guilty men and women. Criminals were captured, one by the royal guard, and exhibited to the people of Lisbon before deserving punishment.
Por ordem do nosso monarca, serão castigados de acordo com a gravidade dos seus feitos.
Hands cut off. Burned bodies. Hangings. The forces worked without stopping. The punishment was so brutal that, among the population, Don Manuel was called El Rey Judio. Feeling betrayed by Lisbon, the monarch called it a rebellious city and took away all its privileges. The Lisbon Massacre of 1506 is not included in school curricula and has been forgotten.